In this video, I'm going to talk about how human memory and the brain works and what that means for your practice. Hi, I'm Marcus and I play the shakuhachi. In the first video of this new series on how to practice, I looked at deliberate practice. Rather than just go through the motions and play through a piece a few times, it is important to practice deliberately. Being deliberate means being intentional about what you do when you practice. Today, I want to look a bit more generally at what happens with you when you learn and why repetitions are so important for practicing. And I'll also address the popular questions of how many repetitions you need to learn something. As I said in the previous video, learning to play an instrument means to acquire a skill that you did not have before. So it is a process of change. But what changes? We can actually give a very clear answer to this. It is a change in your memory. And because the memory is located in the brain, it is a change in your brain. Of course, I should say that it may also involve certain other bodily changes, like building up certain muscles to be able to execute the movements. Think of playing taiko, for example, but let's ignore that for now. So, if learning basically is memorization, today let's look at the fact that because of the way the human brain works, you memorize what you do. Just that. That sounds trivial, right? So let me make this more explicit. You memorize what you do, and it does not matter if what you do is wrong or if it's right. Without going into too much technical detail here, you probably know that your brain consists of neurons and connections between these neurons. This is called a neural network. When you learn or whenever you do something, you form a memory. Forming a memory means forming a pathway through this network, through this neural network. This pathway encodes the information that you learned. And you form a pathway regardless of whether you did something right or wrong. So if you do something correctly, you will memorize it. If you do something incorrectly, you will also memorize it. Your memory does not distinguish between these two. And this means the next time you try to do the same thing, your brain just activates this pathway and it does not distinguish if what you learned was right or wrong. If it is desired behavior, as you say, or undesired behavior. For musical practice, this has an important consequence. Assume you do something twice. Once correctly, once incorrectly. So once correctly, you form a correct pathway. Once incorrectly, you form a wrong pathway. The next time you're doing the same thing, there is a 50-50 chance of either pathway being used. I'm oversimplifying here a bit, of course, but your brain basically has no way of distinguishing between these two pathways. I mean, you might argue, of course I remember if I made a mistake, so I have a way of distinguishing these two pathways, right? And confusingly, that is also true. Explaining this apparent contradiction leads us too much off topic here, but let me just say, remembering that you made a mistake and knowing how to do something on the instrument or with your voice happen in two different types of memory. Remembering the mistake is part of the so-called episodic memory, which stores events from your life. So, when you met your partner, if you have a partner, for example, right? Big event in your life. This is part of episodic memory. You also remember the last wrong note you played, maybe, okay? So, this contains big and small memories of things that happened in your life. Knowing how to do something is part of the motor memory, what people these days like to call muscle memory. Motor memory stores how you do something, how you play a note, how you sing a note, something like that. But let's go back to the point that your brain does not know which one of the two behaviors that we had right now. It does not know which one to execute. You or your brain learns which pathway to use by strengthening one of the two pathways, to stick with this minimal example that we had. This is why repetitions are so important. Once a pathway is formed, if you execute the same behavior again, this pathway is strengthened. And one consequence of strengthening a pathway is that it is more likely that this one will be used the next time. So, say you did something right once, wrong once, the old example, and then again right once, okay? Now you have the correct pathway twice and the wrong one only once. So again, I'm oversimplifying. Instead of having used each pathway 50% of the time, Now you use the correct one 66% of the time, 2/3, and the wrong one 33%, 1/3. So now the next time, the chance of using the right pathway is twice as high as using the wrong one. If you add one more correct repetition, you're at 75 to 24. So 3 here, 1 here, and so on. Of course, if you make a mistake, going back to 2 versus 1, yeah, so if we go back to this, if you now make a mistake instead of a correct 4th repetition, the balance shifts back the other way again. So if the 4th repetition is wrong, you're back to 50-50, 2 versus 2. By the way, random comment, this is why gaslighting works, okay? So you know that something is a lie, but you've heard the lie so many times that you think it must be right. It's just the way your memory works. It's just the way your brain works, okay? Anyway, back to the topic. The next question then, of course, is how many repetitions do you need so that you reliably execute the correct pathway? This is called overlearning, and there are many suggestions on how to do it and what the best strategy for overlearning is. There is a whole body of literature on overlearning. And that may be worth looking into at some other time, okay? But here, again, would lead us off topic too much. Here, let me give you an easy rule of thumb that is proposed by Molly Gabriel, also a researcher plus musician. And this rule is repeat something half the number of times that it took you to get it right. So, if it takes you 10 attempts to get something right, repeat it 5 more times. If it takes you 15 attempts, repeat it 7.5, 8 more times. Okay? Very simple rule. There are 3 important additions, however, to this rule of thumb. The most important one is that you need to repeat it correctly half the number of times in a row.
Row, row, row your boat.
This means if it takes you 10 times to get it right, you do it correctly 5 more times in a row, as the rule says. But if your 3rd repetition then is wrong, for example, you don't continue to 5, but you start back at 1. Then, if you continue doing it 4 more correct times, but the 5th one is wrong, start again at 1. You get the idea. The second addition is that you should do at least 5 correct repetitions. So if you get it right on the first time, do it at least 5 more times, unless it's something very easy, okay? And finally, it is even better if you do the same number of correct repetitions in a row as it took you to get it right in the first place. So not just half, but the same number of times. So if it takes you 10 attempts to get something right the first time, do 10 repetitions, 10 correct repetitions in a row. And finally, also very important to say, it is important to count the number of repetitions explicitly. The reason for this is that you will vastly overestimate the number of times you did it correctly, meaning, to make up some numbers here, if you just repeated it 4 times correctly in a row, you probably think that you already did it 7 times, okay? Your memory, your self-awareness is very unreliable in this regard, unfortunately. So count explicitly. So let us look at this principle in practice. Let us look at something that my teacher made very clear to me very early on when I was starting to learn playing shakuhachi. It is actually very similar as well to what I had to learn when I was playing the violin as a kid. So this is when you start learning to play merry notes on the shakuhachi, you must learn to play them with the correct pitch. So for those of you who don't play shakuhachi, this is a shakuhachi, playing merry means you bend the note down. Okay, this means playing merry. And as you can see, you can produce any frequency. Okay, so this is not like a keyed instrument where you hit a key and then you have the correct pitch, if it's tuned correctly, the instrument. But here you actually have to find exactly the right spot. Okay, so it's the same for playing a string instrument. It's the same for singing. Yeah, or if you play fretless bass, something like that. There are 2 challenges to get playing merry on the shakuhachi right. The first challenge is probably quite obvious. It is that you have to be able to make a sound in this low playing position. So you need to play not in this position, but here. And beginners often find this very challenging. But there is an equally tricky challenge, which is to get to that pitch directly and not slide around. So, instead of, it is actually very easy to form the pathway, meaning to learn a bad habit, of correcting the pitch if it is not right. So what happens in that case is that you execute the movement of going to Medi, identify the pitch, execute the correction, and possibly you do this repeatedly until you get the desired pitch. So if you do this repeatedly, this creates a bad habit, a bad pathway, because you learn to rely on these corrections, which means you don't learn the exact Medi position for that pitch. Instead, you will play with a constantly fluctuating pitch, and frankly, that sounds awful. It's super annoying listening to something like that. So the practice you need to do is execute the movement and stop. Then you identify the pitch, and then you analyze if it is correct or if you need to do something differently. But you don't make a correction. You just notice what went wrong. So, this is not the pitch I want.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
Why that is the case if you're not playing shakuhachi, it's a whole other big story, okay? But just believe me on this one, this is not the pitch I wanted.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
But the important thing is, I stop here. I'm not correcting, okay? After I stop and analyzed, I do the next repetition, of course, while trying to execute a better movement this time, and then you go through the same process again, and you repeat it as many times as necessary as per the rule of thumb that I mentioned. So let's say, so this pitch is too high. Okay, so I made it wrong. I played it wrong once, so I need to play it at least a half times again correctly. So, or a minimum of 5, as already said. Okay, so now the pitch is too low. Of course, I have to do this for the demonstration. Yes, so this pitch was too low, so I have 2 wrong attempts. So maybe I get it right on the 3rd attempt. Okay, that pitch is good. I know this position is where I need to go, so I repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. For this practice, my teacher, he likes images, metaphors, and I've taken over that from him because I think they're very useful for learning. Anyway, for this practice, my teacher likes to use the image of playing boule or boccia. The idea here is that you throw the ball, so you're not allowed to roll the ball, and you hit the small ball, yeah, which is the aim of the game, that you hit the small ball or touch the small ball, get as close as you can. You throw the ball so that it ideally hits the small ball. Once the big ball leaves your hand, you cannot correct this anymore. You have no influence on the ball anymore. You just can observe the result. And then, for your next throw, you can attempt to do better. You can adjust your throwing the next time. To go back to the rule of thumb, if you get the pitch correct the first time, repeat it 5 more times. If you get the pitch right on the 10th try, do it 5 more times. Or better yet, do it 10 more times. Okay? So, the takeaway today is, you memorize what you do, and it does not matter if what you do is wrong or if it's right. Your brain will form a pathway either way. So, my advice in a nutshell, practice accordingly. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.